Hello, this is Catherine from Accelerated Reader. Today I will be reading Paul and Sammy's Adventures, the Little Boy Who Learned How to Make Friends by Deana Peters. Before I begin reading, I would like to give a big thanks to the author for sending me this book to read on my channel. In the description below, I have included links where you may find and purchase this book. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Paul and Sammy's Adventures Forward. This book began as a story for my 7-year-old son, Paul. Having problems at school, I thought if I could make him smile, he would forget about the bullies. I started to write, not knowing this would take on a mind of its own and end up being a book, not just a story. After the book was finished, I self-published, sending myself the copyright through the post. Former President Clinton was sent a copy to read to his children to help them smile. A few weeks later, I received a reply from the White House with a thank you card signed by President Clinton himself. So, therefore, I dedicate this book and any following books to those children who think they have no reason to smile. I hope this book will help to put the smile back on their face. Please enjoy. Thank you for reading. Paul and Sammy's Adventures, Chapter 1, The Visit. While I lay in my bed last night, I remembered what my daddy had said to me a few days before. The weather was getting really cold, and you could see your breath. It was fun as I pretended to be a dragon. Daddy said, "If it snows again this winter and the snow is deep enough, we might get a visit from Sammy again." Well, being only 7 years old, I tried to stay awake that night. Sleep is sneaky, and it happens without you knowing it happened. Before I knew it, I was waking up the next morning. I jumped out of my bed and ran to open the curtains, hoping to find snow on the ground. There was only a light frost. I quickly got dressed and rushed down the stairs. "Daddy! Daddy!" I shouted. "Will it snow today?" "Maybe," he said as he rushed out of the door with his coat in his hand. Mom took me to school after breakfast that morning, but I couldn't concentrate. I wanted it to snow so badly. I sat at my desk waiting, hoping to see the first flakes of snow falling from the sky. "Paul! Paul!" Mrs. Johnson shouted. "Yes. I'm listening," I said. Mrs. Johnson is my teacher. She is very old with whiskers growing out of her chin. And she is a really nice, kind teacher most of the time. "Turn around and look at what you are supposed to be doing. Have you finished?" I swung my legs back underneath my desk and said quietly, "No, miss." I tried to do my work. I tried not to look out of the window. Having done very little work, the home bell rang. That's when I heard someone shout, "Look, it's snowing!" I rushed to the window, and sure enough, small flakes were falling from a very gray sky. Mrs. Johnson said, "Do you know why the sky is gray, children?" But nobody knew she made us all sit back in our seats while she explained that the sky was gray because there was a lot more snow to come, and this was just the beginning of winter. The snow didn't settle on the ground that day. I think the flakes were too small, but I knew once the winter arrived, Sammy wouldn't be far behind. During the time I left school and arrived back the next morning, the playground was white. It had begun to settle. I looked up at the sky and prayed it would continue all week without stopping. The year before, the winter was so bad it must have been at least 3 feet deep in snow. I hoped it would be deeper this year because the deeper the snow was, the bigger Sammy would become. The snowflakes kept falling, and as it fell faster, I became more excited, of course. Nobody else knew why I couldn't sit still and kept staring out of the window with a big grin on my face. I didn't care. I just wanted to go home and see if it was deep enough in my garden for a snowman to appear. Of course, it would settle everywhere, but my garden was a magical place where Sammy would come, and I could tell him if I had a bad day at school, or even if I had a good day. He would just listen. If I had a bad day, he would comfort me. If, by chance, I had a good day, I would imagine him smiling, which made me happy. When Mom told me that night that it was time for bed, I rushed up the stairs and jumped under my covers. The quicker I went to sleep, the quicker I got to see how much snow had fallen during the night. I was so excited. I couldn't wait for morning. I squeezed my eyes tight, trying to make myself go to sleep. But when you want to go to sleep, it doesn't happen. Only when you are trying to stay awake do you fall asleep. I eventually must have fallen asleep because before I knew it, my mom was calling me to get up for school. For a second, I had forgotten about the snow. Then I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. It had been snowing all night, and it was everywhere. A huge frozen, cold white blanket, and I just knew Sammy would come. I raced downstairs to check the garden. It was chilly, and I only had my pajamas on, but I didn't care. As I stared into the white, empty garden, Sammy was nowhere to be seen, and I didn't understand. Sammy had visited my garden every other time it snowed. Why not now? Did I do something wrong? Would he ever come back? Then I thought to myself, no, Sammy would never let me down. He will be here. It has been 3 days since the snow began to fall, and I was just about to give up when Daddy came rushing into my bedroom, and with a very excited sort of panicked voice, said, "He's here! Sammy has visited the magic garden once again." At first, I shook my head in disbelief and asked him if he was having a joke. Daddy got really serious and said, "Come on, Paul, get up and come see for yourself. He's in the garden and he's huge. He's just standing there waiting for you." I felt a feeling rushing through my body, a warm feeling, then butterflies in my tummy. I began to smile, my eyes opened wide, and I couldn't get out of bed quick enough. I pushed past Daddy and heard him shout, "Paul, come back! You're not dressed!" It could have been 1,000,000 degrees below outside, and I would still feel warm when I was with Sammy. I opened the back door and slowly stepped onto the snow wearing my slippers. It was really deep this year, and my slippers had disappeared underneath, but I didn't mind. I turned the corner, and there he was, as large as life, but still a snowman. As I walked toward him, he got taller and taller. He was bigger than I had ever seen him before. Sammy made me feel so happy. I could talk to him and he would listen. When I felt sad, I only told Sammy why and about the things that were making me sad. Sometimes I had secrets, and I knew if I told Sammy, no one else would know. They would stay between him and me. One day, a boy at my school began to pick on me. I don't know why I didn't do anything to him. He started to call me nasty names, and it felt wrong. He was being hurtful to me, and I felt sad. I tried to be brave, but it hurt and upset me. I could feel something inside of me. I think it was anger, but I had never felt this before, so couldn't be sure. I tried telling myself, he's just a mean boy, and to ignore him. The teacher said words can't hurt, but they can. They stay in your mind for a very long time. Mean words made me feel sad, and that hurt. The day ended up the same, with my mom picking me up, and as soon as we got home, Mom wanted to know why I had been crying. I tried to cover it up by saying my eyes had just been watering. My mom doesn't listen like Sammy. He doesn't ask questions. After tea that night, I took my little chair from the kitchen. I have a chair to stand on to help with the pots. I took my chair and went into the garden to talk to Sammy. Sammy, I said, why are some kids so cruel? Do you know what happened to me at school today? Just as I was about to explain, I heard a voice. I didn't recognize the voice and was a little scared. Then the voice said, Paul, tell me what happened to you. I will listen. I thought to myself, it couldn't be. I knew my garden was magical, but could this really be? After a pause, I said, who are you? Are you a ghost? No, he replied, and I could hear the laughter in his voice. I'm the one who knows you better than your parents. I was confused just for a second. Then I looked at Sammy and said, it's you, isn't it? You can talk. Sammy told me that only I could hear his voice because only I needed to hear him. After I calmed down and got over the shock of hearing him talk to me, I began to explain about the boy at my school. Sammy just listened to me as I told him some of the nasty names the boy was calling me and how I felt inside. After I had finished, I asked him what I should do to get him to stop, and he said, calling someone names can sometimes hide insecurities in the child doing the name calling. Well, as I'm only 7, I had no idea what that meant, so I just said, does that mean he is having a bad time in his own life and doesn't have you to talk to? Maybe that's exactly how he feels. I asked what I should do, and he said, make friends with the boy, smile and ask him to play. He might say no, he might run away. He might just surprise you and play. Sammy made me feel brave every time I talked to him. The next day at school, I saw the same boy, and instead of trying to run away, I asked him if he wanted to play football with me, as I had just gotten a new ball from my visiting uncle. I would be lying if I said I wasn't scared. I was terrified, but I did it and was shocked when he said, okay. That night, when I got home, I felt so proud of myself, I couldn't wait to tell Sammy. I rushed into the garden shouting, Sammy! Sammy! I did it. I was brave. I didn't get very far before I heard Mom calling me. I had to go inside because she said, you will catch your death. It sounded a bit silly, being able to catch your own death, but I shouted, okay, I'm coming. Just as I turned to go inside, I heard Sammy. He said, Paul, I have a surprise for you. Come back when everyone is asleep. Okay, I said and ran inside. Later that night, I waited until the house was quiet and everyone was in bed and asleep. I crept out of bed and tiptoed across the room to the open door. I made my way down the stairs and reached the back door. I knew it would be locked, and I spent what seemed like a really long time trying to turn the key. I think the door must have had a child lock on it or something. I wiggled it and twisted and even pushed it and turned it with all my strength until finally it turned and I unlocked it. It took me so much effort to unlock, I nearly fell over backwards, but held onto the back of my chair. I climbed off my chair and moved it away so I could open the door. I peered out into the snow-covered garden, but Sammy was nowhere to be seen. "He's gone," I said to myself, and a feeling of sadness came over my whole body. I was about to close the door with tears in my eyes when I heard a voice saying, "Paul, Paul, I'm over here." I couldn't believe my eyes. It was Sammy. He looked different. He had legs and arms. He was walking and talking to me. For a minute I was a little scared, but it was still just Sammy. As I reached him, Sammy said, "Do you like it? I did it as a surprise." "This is awesome," I said. After I had stopped freaking out, I asked him what he wanted to show me. "Close your eyes very tight. Wish to be in Snowtopia," he whispered into my ear. Well, I was 7 years old and a small guy, so I struggled to say Snowtopia, but after 3 attempts, said it. I began to feel very strange and asked if I could open my eyes, but Sammy said not yet. He said, "Hold on tight, Paul, don't let go." He held out both of his arms, and with a little wobble, he started to move. I felt the ground shake, and for a second I was scared. "What's happening?" I asked him. "We are going somewhere I can feel at home, and we can play for a while," he replied. Sammy didn't speak again until we arrived. There was so much snow, buildings made of snow, snow statues, and snow sleds. Everything was made from snow. It was amazing. "Where are we, Sammy?" I said. "Is this where Santa lives?" "Do you mean the North Pole, Paul?" he said in a puzzled voice. Sammy began to laugh. "No, silly, this is where I live. This is Snowtopia. You wished to come here, so here we are." He paused for a while, then began to sing a jolly little song. "Snow, snow all around, in Snowtopia snow is all year round. We don't have bricks, we don't have mud, we just have snow, and that's really good." He said that being here made him feel really happy, and I could tell he was happy. I wanted to ask him if he had a family here, and if so, where they were. Before I got a chance to say anything, Sammy said, "Come with me, Paul. I want you to meet someone." "Who?" I answered, but he never said a word. We walked for a short while, then stopped. "Close your eyes and no peeping," he said. He sounded excited. I looked at him for a few seconds, then closed my eyes. I felt Sammy grab my hand and lead me further along the snowy path. It wasn't very long before Sammy stopped. I couldn't see anything, so I bumped into him and he began to laugh. "Put your hands down, Paul, and open your eyes. We are here." As he let go of my hand, I felt the slippery cold snow beneath my feet and began to lose my balance. "Woo!" I yelled. "This is so much fun!" And Sammy grabbed me before I could fall on my bottom. I didn't realize what I was seeing at first. My eyes were still a bit unfocused from being tightly closed for so long. As my sight began to return, I could see a figure in front of me. It couldn't be Sammy. He was holding my hand and standing right beside me. Who was it? I suddenly felt a prod in my ribs, and Sammy said, "Well, don't stare. Say hello." I thought for a while and said, "Hi, I'm Paul. It's nice to meet you," although I was still confused about who this was. I thought it's best to be polite. I looked at Sammy and he was so happy he was smiling. I had never seen him smile that much before. I beckoned him to come down so I could whisper in his ear. Who was that? Where did they come from? Is that your wife? He replied. That's awesome. Do you have any other family? What's your wife's name? What do I call her? Then he said, come sit here and I will explain everything to you. In Snowtopia, we don't use words to communicate. We don't speak to each other like that. We don't have to say a word. We send each other messages through our minds. And the other snow person automatically knows what the message is. All of Snowtopia is verbally silent. However, when a snow person leaves to help someone, their voices come back, just like mine did. And we change our appearance as not to scare the children. But I don't think that works. Sammy, I said, can I do it? Can I talk with my mind? I don't know, he said. Close your eyes and have a go. So that's what I did. I closed my eyes really tight and tried to say hi, but nothing happened. I wanted to ask Sammy's wife if there were any little snow people I could play with. I suppose you could call them snow kids. Just then, I heard Sammy calling me. Paul, it's no good. You can't do it. You're just making your face go bright red. I let out a huge sigh. I was so disappointed at not being able to talk through my mind. I really thought I could do it. Sammy smiled and said, it's okay. Don't worry about it. I think it's about time I got you home before your parents wake up and find you missing. I didn't want to go home. I wanted to explore. Do we have to go? I said. Can't we just stay a little bit longer? Well, he said, we can always come back another night if you really want to. Yes, yes, I shouted. How about tomorrow? Please. Come on, he said. Let's get you home. Close your eyes and wish very hard to be in your garden. I wished and I wished. I must have been really tired as I fell into a deep sleep right there next to Sammy. I didn't wake up until I heard Sammy whispering in my ear, Paul, wake up. You are home and must return to your bed. I slowly and very tiredly opened my eyes just enough to see it was still nighttime. How did that happen? How is it still night? Sammy explained that when a human child leaves with a snowman or a snow woman, as they help children as well, the time slows down while they are away. So, although it felt like a long time, it was only a few minutes on Earth. I think I understand, I said, but I was so sleepy, and Sammy said I needed to go inside. It was time to say goodbye. Can you promise me you will be here tomorrow, please? He smiled and said he would be right where I left him. Then he made me promise to go to school in the morning, do all my work, and not misbehave. I said I would. I gave Sammy a huge hug and said good night. I left him in the garden and crept back through the door. I locked it much easier than I unlocked it, which was hard. I carried my chair and put it back where it had been before. I went down the hall and began to climb the stairs when all of a sudden I heard my mom. Paul? Paul, is that you? Right then, the feel of terror rushed through my entire body. What do I say? I reached the top of the stairs just before she came out of her bedroom. She looked at me and said, What are you doing out of bed? Did you have a nightmare? Well, that was a good excuse, so I just nodded and said I needed a drink. Phew. Okay, but back off to bed with you. Mom was sleepy too. She tucked me back into my bed, kissed me good night, and turned out the light. She then closed the door and returned to her own room. I came down for breakfast the next morning, looking a little tired, but only I knew the reason why. Before I left for school, I ran into the garden just to make sure Sammy had kept his word and was still where I left him. Guess what? He was standing there as large as life with a huge smile on his face. I had never seen a snowman with a smile on his face before. I wanted so much to go and talk to him, but I promised I would go to school. I turned around and went back inside just in time to see Mom walking down the hall, holding my coat. "Come on, Sleepy, you're going to be late," she said. I quickly put on my coat and off we went. On the way, I wondered if any of my friends had a Sammy in their garden. I couldn't ask as he was a secret friend, and I don't think they would believe me. Anyway, I was very quiet that day as I was remembering what had happened, and I couldn't tell anyone. When the day was over, my teacher called me to one side and asked me if everything was all right, as I wasn't my usual self. I replied, "Would you like me to be my usual self?" "No, that's okay. As long as things are good at home, you can stay this version of yourself. I like it." From that day forward and all through the winter months, my schoolwork improved more and more, and my grades got higher and higher. I owed all of this to my very special and very secret friend. I knew he would only be able to stay for a while each winter, as long as it snowed. That's why I cherished every second I had with him, and I know it meant so much to Sammy too. All the children lined up in the playground to go into school. I lined up too, and yes, I did keep my promise to Sammy. I behaved myself and I did all my work at school and my homework. All that work wasn't easy. That afternoon, after lunch, I was horrified when I looked out of the classroom window and saw the sun trying to break through the clouds. "Oh no!" I shouted. "Whatever is wrong, Paul?" my teacher asked. I tried to hold back the panic. I felt because I knew the sun would melt Sammy and I wouldn't see him until it snowed again. I felt my eyes welling up and tears beginning to run down my face. I fought them back and wiped my eyes and then did my work as best as I could. I promised. As the day went on, my panic got worse and my tummy began to hurt, so I told my teacher and she rang my mom to come and collect me. I knew it was just the thought of Sammy not being there at the end of the school day that scared me, but I couldn't wait. After a while, Mom rushed into the nurse's office. "Are you okay, Paul?" she said. She was out of breath. I think she had been running. The nurse said as my tummy was still hurting, I should go home. I was quiet all the way, thinking and hoping that the sun would not come out and that Sammy would still be in the garden. We arrived home after a few minutes as my school is just around the corner from my house. My mom wanted me to get into my bed for the rest of the day, but all I wanted to do was go outside and talk to Sammy one last time until it snowed again. Why do grown-ups always get to boss kids about? Just because I have a tummy ache doesn't mean I need to go to bed. Mom picked me up like a baby and carried me up the stairs into my room. She told me to put on my pajamas and she would get me a hot water bottle for my tummy. I waited and waited until she came back with a very hot water bottle wrapped in a towel. "Put this on your tummy. It will help," she said. She then left and went back downstairs. I lay in bed thinking to myself, how can I sneak into the garden without anyone seeing me? This must have taken me ages because when I opened my eyes, the sun was shining through my window. "No! No!" I shouted. My mom came running into my room. "What's wrong?" she said. I tried to hide it, but I was so scared that Sammy had melted and he would be gone. I just said, "It's okay. I feel a lot better now. Can I get up and go downstairs, please, Mom?" My mom said I could, but I had to stay inside. I jumped out of bed, hiding the tears welling up in my eyes, grabbed my dressing gown and slippers, and raced down the stairs. I knew Mom would be upstairs for a while, putting washing away, so I ran to the garden expecting to see it empty. To my surprise, he was still there. He was a little wet, but still there. "Sammy," I whispered in a low voice. "Are you okay?" After a few minutes, Sammy said in a very low, slow voice, "You know I have to go, Paul, but I promise I will return." I began to cry and asked him to stay. I was so lonely when he wasn't here. "I told you, Paul, I will always come back and visit you when it snows, for as long as you need me to," he whispered. This was the last thing he said to me. I was so scared. "Sammy! Sammy! Please don't go. I need you." I stayed with him as much as I could until one morning I woke up. The sun was shining and Sammy was gone. That morning I cried, and I cried in my room, but in my heart I knew he would come back and visit me as soon as the weather changed and the snow came back. I just felt sad because I had to wait to see my very best friend. I wanted him to be proud of me, so every day I went to school and did all my work. I knew Sammy would just know if I had been naughty, so I decided to be helpful instead. I loved Sammy so much, I would have done anything he asked me to do. I started to enjoy school and decided it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. After school, I would sit for a while in my room and dream about where Sammy and I would be going on our next adventure. Chapter 2: Sammy and the Sled. Sammy and I had a long time away from each other during the summer months. During this time, I did a lot of other things and went to a lot of other places. I had a lot of fun, but none of those things compared to the time I spent with Sammy. As the weather gets colder, I get so excited to see the sun disappear and the snow clouds appear in the sky. A few weeks passed and it began to get colder and colder. The wind blew and the rain started to fall. The leaves began to fall from the trees. Although it was very cold, I knew it would be a few months before enough snow began to settle on the ground. My mom said this was autumn, and it lasts for a while before winter gets here. I have so much to tell Sammy when he comes back to visit. While sitting in my bedroom one night in my pajamas, I wondered, what if Sammy doesn't come back ever again? If it doesn't snow, he can't come back. What will I do? I will have nobody to go on adventures with. My eyes began to fill with tears, and I began to panic just a little bit. Then I remembered Sammy's last words to me. He would always come back to visit for as long as I needed him, and I need him so much. I calmed myself down, and from that moment on, I never believed for one moment that he would not come back. I had to believe he would keep his word. The next few months of sun and warmth went by so slowly for me. I counted every week and watched out of the window as it began to get colder. Autumn was coming, and winter would follow. That means snow. I began to get excited, and I was the only person who knew why I loved the cold so much. After a few weeks of leaves falling off the trees and the wind blowing, the garden fence down. I felt the change in temperature, and the rain felt much colder. I was so happy each time the weather changed. I could hardly keep it inside. Then, on the first morning of the following week, I awoke to icicles hanging from the outside of my bedroom window. "Yes! Yes!" I shouted and flung open the window to feel the temperature. My mom yelled at me and told me to close it and get down. I knew right at that moment that winter was here. I stared out of the window, trying to see across the other gardens. I wanted to see if they had icicles too. I stretched my neck as far as it would stretch, and I saw lots of icicles everywhere. They were glistening in the daylight. I am only small, so I couldn't see very far, but they were there. I was so excited I tried to get dressed in double quick time, but I got in a bit of a muddle. I put my trousers on backwards, my socks on inside out, and my shoes on the wrong feet. Now, to me, I was dressed, but my mom said I had to start from the beginning and slow down. I didn't want to slow down. I wanted to go faster. I just wanted to run as fast as I could into the garden. But it's never that easy in my house. Mom was waiting for me in the kitchen. "Breakfast, Paul," she said. "I don't want any this morning, Mom," I said. She looked at me with the look that only mothers have and whispered, "Yes, you do, young man." I didn't want to argue and make her mad. That would get me grounded, and I would never be allowed outside. And you know what that means, right? After my toast, I said thank you and grabbed my coat. I raced to the back door, and you guessed it was locked. Hold on, I will open it for you," my mom said. As the door opened, the freezing cold air began to blow into the house, and I felt it against my face. I looked out of the door, and the snow was blowing all around in the wind. It was very, very cold. I tried to look for Sammy through the snow, but it was really hard. I couldn't see much. I had to find him, so I began to walk down the garden to where he usually stands, but he wasn't there. My heart sank, and I began to feel sad. I couldn't see him. Sammy wasn't there. "Sammy, where are you? I need you, Sammy." Just as I was about to go back inside, I heard a noise. It was coming from the bottom of the garden. I turned around and slowly walked close and close to see where the noise was coming from. The snow was blowing so hard against my face, I lost all feeling in my cheeks. I expected to find an animal in the bushes. I slowly poked my head around the side of the big oak tree. And to my surprise, it was him. It was Sammy. He was standing against the wooden fence. I didn't know why he was right at the bottom of my garden. Maybe the snow was blowing too fast for him too. I didn't care. I was so happy to see him. Suddenly, I began to get a little confused. And I came to a sudden stop. Was the snow playing tricks on my eyes? Was I seeing things? I rubbed my eyes and took another look. I saw 2 snowmen. One was definitely Sammy, but the other one I had never seen before. He was standing just to the side of Sammy, and a little bit behind, sort of hiding. I started walking towards them again, until I was a few feet away. I stopped again, too afraid to go any closer. "Paul, don't be scared. Come closer. He won't hurt you. I thought I would bring you someone to play with. His name is Erba." Sammy looked at me and smiled. He held out his arms, and I ran towards him and gave him a big hug. "I knew would come back. I just knew it," I cried. I never wanted to let go of Sammy, but I remembered there was another snowman with him. "Hi," I said. Then I turned to Sammy and asked, "Can Erba hear me? Can he talk to me like you can?" "Of course I can, silly. Don't you remember what Sammy told you the last time he visited you?" "Yes, of course. You can only talk when you leave Snowtopia. It just slipped my mind." Sammy then asked me where I wanted to go on our adventure. I really wanted to go back to Snowtopia, but I also wanted to stay here and play. I thought for a few seconds, because that's all it took for me to decide, and I shouted, "Let's go to Snowtopia." As they both began to laugh, I got ready to make my wish and closed my eyes. "Hold on," he yelled. "What about your tummy?" "It's okay. I feel better now. I just need to play. I'm so excited. I really liked Snowtopia. They had more snow, and I have lots more fun making snowballs." I once again closed my eyes and said the word Snowtopia in my mind. I knew it was working because I felt the dizziness take over my body again. As Erba's voice disappeared, I asked, "Has he gone already? Shouldn't he wait for us?" "No, he's all right. He knows the way home. We all have a built-in homing signal that shows us which way to go." Sammy began to laugh and said, "When you go out, do you get lost?" "I do if I am in a strange place on my own," I answered. I still had my eyes tightly closed and could feel the snow blow around my body. It was cold and a little wet, but after a few seconds it stopped and I felt the ground once again. Sammy grew really big this year. It was a bit strange, but I was okay with it. I could see something coming into view. As I opened my eyes and stopped rubbing, I began to get my sight back. Sammy began to sing, "Snow, snow all around. In Snowtopia, snow is all year round. We don't have bricks, we don't have mud, we just have snow, and that's really good." That was his "I'm home" song. I knew we were back in Snowtopia at last. We had arrived in the same place as before, and that was really strange. I gently sat on the snow and waited for Erba to get home. "Don't worry, he'll be here in a few minutes," Sammy said. He then rushed to meet his wife. I still don't know what I should call her, but maybe I don't need to know. I was sitting on the cold snow for what seemed like a long time, for a 7-year-old, when I suddenly saw Erba. He was in trouble. He was coming back very low. I yelled for Sammy to come quick. "What's wrong?" he shouted from his snow house. "It's Erba. He's in trouble, I think." "He's going to crash," I shouted back. "Oh no!" he screamed and started to run towards me. Sammy was scared, and so was I. Erba was only little. He could be really hurt if he crashed. "Paul, help me pile the snow so it will break his fall," Sammy said. I was really scared at this point and asked Sammy if Erba had left before. This was his first time leaving Snowtopia, and I don't think he's going to land safely. Sammy began to panic. He's losing control and he's not going to make it. I should never have left him behind. Please don't let him get hurt. Sammy sounded like he was praying. Sammy was a mess. He was terrified Erba was going to get hurt. We gathered as much snow as we could find and waved Erba towards it. He began to get even slower and was wobbling all over in the wind. Sammy and I couldn't watch and waited for the thud. As Erba hit the pile of snow, we waited and waited, but nothing happened. Slowly, we both opened our eyes and Erba was standing smiling right in front of us both. He laughed and said, "Sammy, Paul, look at me. I'm okay. I can do it. I can leave and help children feel better." With a huge sigh of relief, both Sammy and I just stood looking at him. Erba sounded so happy and proud of himself. "Come here, Erba," Sammy said. I think he was a little cross with him. Erba stood in front of Sammy and said, "I suppose you think that's funny, don't you?" Erba just smiled at Sammy, and we all burst out laughing. Erba was so sorry for scaring both of us and said he had learned his lesson. I felt really sorry for Erba. After all, it was the first time he had left home before. Sammy told Erba to go apologize to his mother, then he could come back and play. I hoped Erba would come back soon and play. Sammy said that we could play with the sled for a while as long as we were careful. The other children there, I could hear them playing and having fun behind the hill in the distance. The snow began to get heavier and I could hardly see my hands in front of my face. I thought I heard someone running. It sounded a little like a horse galloping. It was Erba. He ran out of the snow straight towards me. Then, bang! He knocked me off my feet and landed on top of me. "Let's go! I'm free! Come on, Paul!" Erba shouted. He jumped up and began to run towards the hill. Wait! I can't see you! I'm going to get lost," I begged. I wonder if the kids here have built-in radar or something because I think I'm lost already, I thought to myself. All I could see was snow. I slowed down and began to walk a little at a time. This was really strange. I heard laughter and saw nothing but snow. Then I felt something touch my arm and lead me to the hill, and beyond it was an amazing sight. Behind the biggest hill had ever seen, there were kids. Lots of kids, but not kids like me. These were snow kids of all shapes and sizes. They were sliding from the top of the hill to the bottom. This looked so much fun, I asked Erba if we could do it too. Of course, he said, and grabbed my hand. It was really long way up to the top. Once we reached the very top, I was handed what can only be described as a sheet of very cold ice. Here. You are, he said, laughing. I can't sit on that, I explained. I will get wet trousers. You don't sit on it, so you'll be fine, Erba said. I asked him, how do I use it? And he told me I had to stand on the sheet and slide down the hill. Are you chicken? Erba said. Just watch me. I will go first. He had an enormous grin on his face. We both stood on the sheet of ice, which all the kids called their sled. With a wave of his hands, we began to shuffle forward. My heart began to beat faster and faster. Then it seemed to jump from my chest to my pocket, because that is where I wanted to hide. I was so scared. We were both standing, I with my eyes covered and Erba yelling, "Whee!" Then all of a sudden, we tipped forward and, oh my good night, we tipped over the edge and began to slide down the huge hill. I was horrified. Halfway down the hill, I thought we were going to crash. The snow blew into my eyes and whistled past my ears, but Erba was actually enjoying himself and laughing at the terrified look on my face. We arrived at the bottom in one piece, and he said, "Come on, let's do it again." Well, I wasn't going to let them know how scared I was, so I took hold of the sled and climbed up the hill, all the way to the top. I thought to myself, what am I doing? But I kept going. I told Erba I could do it, so here goes. I could see him laughing at me at the bottom of the hill. "Come on," he shouted. "It's not that high. You just came down with me. Just do it." I stood for a few more seconds to find the courage to push myself over the edge. Very carefully, I climbed onto the sled. "Whoo!" I cried, falling onto the snow. It was really slippery, especially when you are wearing slippers. I tried again, but I rubbed soft snow on the bottom of my slippers first, then climbed onto the sled again. This time, my slippers stuck to it like glue. Or was it magic? I tried to lift up my feet, but they really were stuck. I took one more look over the edge, then took a few little jumps forward, which wasn't easy stuck to a sheet of ice. I took a huge breath, held it, and took a final tiny jump, and whee! I was over the edge and sliding towards Erba. I went faster and faster, and I was terrified and excited all at the same time. When I reached the bottom and managed to get my feet off the sled, I asked Erba how I did. He replied with, "Not bad for a beginner. Did you like it?" All I could say was, "I will let you know when I stop shaking, Erba." He then grabbed his sled and passed another one to me. I knew he wanted to go up again. Off we went up the hill. "We'll do it together this time, Paul. It will be fun." I thought, well, why not? It has to be safer with two people rather than one. We reached the top and watched all the other kids having fun sliding down the hill. Now it was our turn. The sled was right there in front of us, and the snow was falling onto it, covering it like a blanket. Suddenly, I felt a shove from behind. It was Erba. He wanted me to go in front. I panicked and began to back up. Then I tried to trick him. I told him he had to go in front because he was heavier than me, and we would go faster. Ha ha, he fell for it. No way was I going in the front. It was terrifying. Erba jumped on the sled, very excited, and said, "Come on, Paul, let's make it go super fast this time." "How do we do that?" I asked. "Just do what I do. It's easy," he said. Without any warning, Erba moved the sled to the edge of the slope and yelled at me to jump on. I was still terrified, but got on behind him very slowly. The sled in front of us was just going down when Erba shouted, "Hold on tight! Here we go!" With that said, he pushed the sled off the edge. What happened next scared the bejesus out of me. He first crouched, then he stood up on the sled. He wanted me to do the same? "Are you crazy?" I yelled as I clung to the side of the sled. The only thing I could hear, apart from the snow and wind rushing past my head, was all the snow kids laughing. Erba stretched out his arms and yelled, "Whee!" It was so fast and so scary. We reached the bottom and I just sat there for a few minutes. Erba said while laughing, "You're just like this sled. You're frozen." I had to admit I had been scared, and then I saw Sammy. I thought to myself, "It's time to go." "I was right," he said. "Have you two finished playing?" "It's time for Paul to go home now." I turned to Erba and gave him a hug and told him this had been a fantastic adventure. Before Sammy and I left, I promised I would teach him how to roller skate the next time he visited me. I waved to the other kids playing on the snow, then closed my eyes as tight as I could and wished really hard to once again be standing in my garden. I didn't feel anything. It wasn't working. A few minutes passed, and I slowly opened my eyes to see Erba standing in front of me. I could see how sad he was that I had to leave, because there were tiny snowflakes falling from his eyes. I told Erba I would be back and not to be sad, then closed my eyes once more and made the same wish. I felt it working, and it made me feel a little dizzy. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, we had stopped and I didn't feel dizzy anymore. "Can I open my eyes now, Sammy?" I said. "It's okay. We made it this time, Paul. You are home." As I opened my eyes, I saw my garden come into view, and my eyes began to focus. I couldn't wait to visit Snowtopia again and see Erba. I felt so happy. Smiling from ear to ear, I said good night and farewell to Sammy as he disappeared and went on his way back to Snowtopia and his family. I said softly, "Until our next big adventure, Sammy, I will miss you. This has been amazing." I must have been exhausted because when I opened my eyes, it was morning and my mom was yelling that I was going to be late for school and to get a move on. I had my usual day at school, which was so long and so boring. As the school bell rang, I ran and collected my things. I followed everyone else to the exit. As I walked into the playground, all I could see was snow. It covered everything. I headed towards the gate, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw something near the caretaker's shed. I stopped and I took another look. It looked like Sammy, but I couldn't be sure, so I decided to take a closer look. As I walked across the playground towards the shed, I checked that nobody was watching. As I got closer, I felt sure I saw a wave. It was Sammy. I started running towards him, took a flying leap towards him, hoping he would catch me. Oh no! I hit the ground with a thud. I had just destroyed a snowman the other kids had built. I felt so silly. There I was lying in a huge pile of snow, which a few minutes before was a snowman. The worst thing was, when I looked up, the caretaker had heard me and was peering down on me with a big grin on his face. After the caretaker helped me get to my feet, he said, "What are you doing, young man?" I brushed the snow off my coat and I quietly replied, the urge to jump on your snowman, sir." He just looked at me and frowned. "Off with you," he grunted, and I ran across the playground. Waiting for Sammy to visit was the hardest thing I ever had to do, because the only time he came was in the winter when it snowed, and that was a whole year away. I wonder what will happen on our next adventure. Chapter 3. Sammy learns to roller skate. Winter didn't come until very late this year, and I began to get very worried that Sammy wouldn't come. At first, there was rain, then the hailstone, which in my mind meant the snow wouldn't be far behind. However, 3 weeks passed with no snow, just hail, stone mixed with rain. The 4th week of no snow had just started. I came home from school, I was still really worried that Sammy wouldn't be able to visit. Mom told me to go change out of my school clothes. I was so sad, but walked up the stairs with my head hanging down with my chin touching my chest. After changing my clothes, I sat on my bed for what seemed like ages, just staring out of my window. I wished so hard for snow because I missed Sammy so much. It made no difference it didn't snow for another 2 weeks. I had just about given up on the snow coming this year, and with no snow, there would be no Sammy. That night, I went to bed feeling sad and upset. I got into my pajamas, put my clothes into the basket for washing, and stood once more gazing out of the window. It was very cold outside, but I guess the snow wasn't coming after all. After a while, I went downstairs to say good night to my mom and dad, then climbed the stairs slowly to my room. I was so tired of hoping and praying. I climbed under the covers and must have fallen asleep. Something woke me in the middle of the night. I was so scared I was shaking. I peeked over the top of my covers, but couldn't see anyone. Thinking I had been dreaming, I tried to go back to sleep. Then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. I was terrified by now, but had to look again. There was nothing there. I tried so hard to go back to sleep. I closed my eyes as tight as I could. I even put my pillow over my ears, but it was hard. As I felt myself nodding off into dreamland, I had a really strange feeling that someone was watching me. I opened my eyes wide and tried to peep, but my covers got in the way. Did we have burglars? Then I heard the sound of a voice I recognized. It was Sammy. He was here standing in my room. I jumped out of my bed and flung my arms around him. The first thing I said to him was, "Where have you been? I missed you." He replied, "I can't visit until the snow falls, and it was very late this year. Although there is only a slight covering of snow, I had to come and see you, Sammy told me." Then he smiled and said, "Come on, let's go." I told him I need to put some clothes on first, but then I would teach him to roller skate. I could see the snow falling from my window, and it was getting heavier. I reached into my wardrobe and grabbed my skates. "Hold these, please, Sammy, while I get dressed," I said. I was so excited. He laughed and asked what they were. "Put them on," I told him. As I was getting dressed, I turned to see Sammy sat on the bedroom floor, puffing and panting, pushing and pulling, trying to get the skates on his snow feet. "I can't do it," Sammy said in a disappointed voice. "First, you have to undo the laces," I whispered. I knew he probably hadn't. Sammy looked across the room at me with a puzzled look on his face. "Laces? What are laces?" I tried to explain that laces were 2 pieces of string that you pull together to keep your footwear on your feet. Then I showed him how much easier it was to put on skates with the laces untied. After a few minutes, Sammy had managed to put on the skates, but standing up well, that was another issue. He tried over and over and over again, every time ended the same way, with Sammy sat on the floor. I suggested we go outside and told Sammy it would be easier to stand. He made his way to the window, and before I could say, "Let's use the door next time," he was gone. He was standing in the garden, waving at me to come down. I crept down the stairs and went into the kitchen. I looked all over for my little chair, but it wasn't there. I had to stand on a big chair to open the door. I looked around and saw nothing. And then I heard that funny sound that I had heard in my bedroom. Tap, tap, tap. There was Sammy pointing towards the living room and laughing. It's in there. Your chair is in the living room. Oh, I remember I took it to watch TV. As I ran into the garden, Sammy had disappeared. All I could see was a huge pile of snow at the bottom of the garden. As I looked closer, it began to move. Then I realized it was Sammy. He must have tried to stand up in the skates and rolled down the garden, falling headfirst into the pile of snow. The only thing visible was a pair of snowy legs sticking out of the built-up snow, waving about in the air. I ran over and began to dig him out. As I got closer, I could hear some strange noises, ones I had never heard before. After loosening a part of the snow, I pulled with all my strength, and suddenly he can fly out of the hole. I fell backwards onto the snow with Sammy, who landed straight on top of me. After a few minutes of brushing snow out of my face and trying to get me breath back, I got to my feet and asked Sammy what the funny noise was. After he got over his embarrassment, he told me it was the noise all snow people make when they are frightened. He went on to explain that if I hadn't been able to help him out in 2 minutes, he would have become a part of that pile of snow. If soft snow meets more soft snow, after 2 minutes, they become as one. This was a terrifying thought, and I asked him if he wanted to carry on with the skating. To my surprise, he said yes. So taking hold of his hand this time, I slowly but carefully pulled him to a clear part of the pavement. I stood Sammy on the path, but as soon as I let go of his hand, he fell over again. On the 4th attempt, Sammy managed to stand on his own. What do I do now? He said. I showed him how to move, first one foot, then the other. But I forgot he had never been skating before, and I had done it many times. Then I remembered the first time I put skates on, I fell over a lot. I told Sammy to stand up and I would stand behind him just in case he started to fall. I know it sounds silly because if he has fallen onto me, he would have squished me. Luckily, he didn't fall, and after a few tries, he did skate to the end of the path. Sammy had the impression that was all there was to skating and said, "You're right, this is easy." However, when I suggested he try going a bit faster and staying on his feet, he looked at me and said, "You're kidding, right?" But he tried and boom, straight on his bottom. Ouch. "Okay, I'm done now," he said in a defeated voice. I helped Sammy to take off the skates, and he took off my soggy slippers. Now it was my turn, but first we needed to clear the snow from the rest of the pavement. There wasn't a lot of snow, so it only took a few minutes. Sammy then helped me to put on the skates and tie them up. I got to my feet and stood in front of Sammy. "Wow," he said, "how do you stand so still without falling over?" Thinking I was really clever, I told him it takes lots of practice. I showed him how I moved my feet. First one foot, then the other. Then Sammy asked if I could go any faster. I told him I could and began to skate up and down the pavement. As I bent my knees to keep balance, I glanced across at Sammy. He was sitting on the cold, wet snow, laughing so hard with his hands, holding his tummy. "Okay, what's so funny?" I asked him. Between his giggles, he told me that I looked so funny, like I was getting ready to jump. I stopped and looked at him with a grin and said, "I bet I don't look as funny as you did upside down in a pile of snow." "Yes, well, I have never skated before," he replied, then told me to get on with it and skate as fast as I could. Once again, I got into the skating pose, knees bent, arms out to the side for balance. I set off slowly at first, then got faster and faster until I reached the end of the path. Sammy stood up and began to clap his hands. He was so happy and really wished he could skate too. I removed my skates and asked Sammy if he wanted another go, but he said his bottom was still a bit tender from the last time, so maybe another time. He asked if he could borrow the skates and take them to Snowtopia to show Erba. He wanted to see if Erba could be better at skating than he was. I said that would be okay. And with that, Sami said it was time for him to go home. I began to get upset and said, "Not yet, please. Stay a little bit longer." But he said it was time. I picked up my roller skates and handed them to Sami, and with him by my side, walked back to the door. We didn't speak the whole way down the footpath. As we reached the door, Sami thanked me for the skating lesson, and I gave him a hug. He told me he would practice, and maybe the next time he visits, he would be able to skate without falling. I told him, "You fall down a lot, but you just have to get back up and try again." He said he would, and he would teach Erba to skate too. Then he made me promise to keep trying at school and try to make friends with any children who look sad or lonely. I promised I would, and I made a Boy Scout swear. "Okay," Sami said. "Now I really do need to go." As much as I wanted Sami to stay, I knew he had to leave, so I said farewell for now and turned around to go inside. Before I closed the door, I looked to see if he was still there, and he was. He whispered, "Go on, go inside. I need to go now, but I will see you next time it snows." I said I would miss him so much and slowly closed the door. The key to lock the door was still a little hard for me to turn, but after using all my strength, I finally locked it and put the chair back. I quietly and carefully climbed up the stairs to my room and got back into bed. For the first time since Sami came to visit, I felt really tired. Maybe the skating wore me out. We will never know. The next morning, Mom woke me up for school. "Come on, sleepyhead. It's time to get up. Breakfast is nearly ready," she told me. Once again, I had to keep Sami a secret so nobody could know what great adventures we had together. I thought to myself while getting dressed, I bet Sami and Erba are having a great time learning to skate in Snowtopia. I just knew they would be great skaters when they returned next winter to visit me. During the next few months, the weather got warmer and the sun stayed higher in the sky for longer. Easter came and I received quite a few Easter eggs. I was enjoying school more and my grades were improving, but I missed Sami so much. In the summer holidays, my mom and dad took me to somewhere foreign, and the beach went on for miles. The water was warm and very clear, but every time I sat still, my mind began to wonder. What were Sami and Erba doing right now, and how long will it be before the weather gets cold again? I wondered where Sami and I will be going on our next adventure. Chapter 4. Sami and Erba's last visit. The winter wasn't like all the other winters when Sami came to visit. This winter I could feel something was wrong, as Erba was acting very strange and a little sad. He told me how much he had enjoyed the adventures we had. Then Sami said in a really quiet voice, "Yes, I don't think we have ever had such memorable adventures." I knew in my heart they were both trying to say that this would be their last visit. Sami explained that there were many more children that needed their help. Both Sami and Erba had helped me so much, both at school and making friends. My schoolwork had improved so drastically, I was now getting high grades in most subjects. I have lots of new friends and I don't get into trouble at school like before. Sami taught me how to control my anger and not take it out on other children. Now children have started making friends with me and the bullying has stopped. They want to play football with me. Later that week, Sami and Erba arrived back in my garden and I noticed Erba wasn't smiling like every other time they came to visit. I wanted to know what was wrong, so I asked him, "Erba, why are you so sad? Why are you not smiling anymore?" He didn't say a word. He just looked at Sami and then shrugged his shoulders. I already knew what was wrong, but I wanted Sami or Erba to tell me. Sami asked me what I would like to do this visit. I tried to put the thought of never seeing them again out of my head and asked if we could go to Snowtopia again. Of course we can, he said. And as I had done many times before, I took hold of Sammy's hand and Erba took hold of mine. I closed my eyes tight and made my wish. I wish to be in Snowtopia. I wish to be in Snowtopia, I repeated. As I felt myself moving and feeling dizzy, I knew it was working, but I still couldn't help but be a little sad. After a few seconds, I felt Sammy squeeze my hand, and he said, "Open your eyes, we are here, Paul." As Snowtopia came into view, I wanted to make this visit special. I asked Erba if he had ever had a snowball fight. He said he hadn't, so I explained. After a few minutes, when Erba understood what a snowball fight was, we headed off to make piles of snowballs. It took me a while to get a small pile, but I looked across at Erba, and he had already made a huge pile in front of him, so he was ready to fight. Erba asked if he should wait for me to catch up, and I agreed he should. It wasn't long before I too had a large pile of snowballs and was ready. "Are you ready?" I yelled. "I've been ready for ages," he shouted back. "Then, let's have a snowball fight," I shouted. 1, 2, 3, go! I heard him yell, so I began to throw my snowballs to where I thought Erba was hiding. For 2 whole minutes, all I could see were snowballs flying over my head. I didn't want to hit Erba, so I didn't throw very hard or anywhere close to him. On the other side, Erba was throwing very close to me and managed to hit me a few times, but it didn't hurt. All of a sudden, everything went quiet. "Erba, are you okay? Are you hurt?" He didn't answer. I shouted louder, "Erba, you're scaring me. Where are you?" I didn't hear anything. I was about to climb out of my hiding place to see where he was, that I felt something cold dribbling down my back. It was freezing and made me jump about as I tried to get it out of my clothes. I looked across the snow and Erba was there, laughing his head off. Erba had crept up behind me, as quiet as a mouse, and thrown a snowball down my neck, which dribbled all the way down my back. Well, I had to get my own back on him, so I chased him all over until I eventually caught up with him. I pulled him to the ground and rubbed his snowy little face into more snow. He thought it was hilarious. "This will teach you to sneak up on me," I laughed. Afterwards, we both just lay there laughing, then held out my hand and said, "Come on, get up." We both stood for a second, then shook hands and called it a draw. We decided to go and play another game. While I was brushing the snow from my clothes, Erba suddenly disappeared. I shouted for him as loud as I could, and Sammy came rushing out. "What's going on? Where's Erba?" "I can't find him, Sammy. He was here a minute ago, then he disappeared." Sammy and I both looked for Erba. We looked everywhere, but couldn't find him. We looked for over an hour, then Sammy said, "It's okay. He will be home when he's hungry." I wasn't convinced. Sammy returned inside, and I went to look for Erba myself. I looked for a while, then I heard a strange noise. I listened to see if I could hear where it was coming from. Then I remembered the sound Sammy made when he was stuck in the pile of snow after trying to roller skate. I began to panic because I remembered what Sammy told me about that noise. As I started toward the noise, I could see snowballs coming from a large gap in the snow. I rushed over and shouted down, "Erba, are you in there? Are you okay?" And I listened for an answer. I didn't hear anything, so I shouted again, "Erba, hold on, I'll get Sammy." I ran as fast as I could to get Sammy and told him where Erba was. He told me to show him. We both ran back to the gap in the snow where I heard the noise, but as we got closer, I saw Sammy's face. He yelled, "Oh no, not in there!" I've told Erba lots of times never to play there. I could see Sammy was scared for Erba, and I didn't know what was down there, but I was scared too. Sammy looked at me and said in a serious voice, "Paul, you must do exactly what I tell you as quickly as possible." I had never heard him so scared. Sammy told me to run and fetch the huge spade-looking thing from outside his house. I ran as fast as I could and returned with the spade, but had no idea what he was going to do with it. I handed the spade to Sammy and stood back. I was shocked. When he began to dig, he dug huge ice cubes out of the snow, but he was really fast. Once he had a few, he dropped them down the gap where Erba had fallen. Before he started to drop the huge ice cubes, he shouted to Erba and told him to stay to the side, out of the way. He dug many ice cubes in a matter of seconds and dropped them into the gap. I asked him what that would do, and he said, "The more cubes I drop into the gap, the easier it will be for Erba to climb onto them and get out of the gap." Sammy sounded very worried. It wasn't long before Sammy had enough ice cubes to help Erba climb high enough for him to reach down and grab him. I could hear Erba, and he was scared. I tried talking to him. I told him Sammy was working really hard and he would be out very soon. After what seemed like a long time, Erba came into sight. He had climbed onto the ice cubes Sammy had thrown down the gap. We could both see Erba, but he was still too far down for Sammy to grab him. He looked at me and said, "2 more should do the trick," and he went off to dig. As he threw the last 2 ice cubes down the gap, we saw Erba climbing up. He just reached the top, the last one, when Sammy reached down and pulled him out of the gap. Sammy checked Erba over to make sure he wasn't hurt. Then he said, "You are both very silly children. That is a dangerous place to play, Erba. Could have been hurt." We walked back to Sammy's house, and Erba went inside as he was a little wobbly on his feet. Sammy then told me it was time for me to leave Snowtopia for the last time. I looked at him and said, "You mean I can never come back, Sammy?" I began to cry. Then he told me that our adventures together were some of the best adventures he had ever had. He explained how much they had both enjoyed visiting me, but they had to go and help lots of other children. He told me that they would never forget me and they knew I would keep them in my heart forever. Sammy looked at me and told me he would always be with me. He would return should I ever need him again. I tried to stop crying, but I just couldn't imagine my life without them both, and I began to feel so sad and lonely. Erba came close, and with ice cube teardrops falling from his eyes, he said, "Paul, I don't want you to go, but Sammy and I have much more to do. I wish it could be different. I wish we could be together forever, but we can't." I heard Sammy say it was time. I wiped my eyes and gave Erba a huge hug and said, "Goodbye, Erba. I am going to miss you so much." This would be the last time I would ever get to talk to him. Sammy took hold of my hand and quietly said, "You know what you have to do, Paul. Close your eyes and make your wish." Slowly, I closed my eyes, never to see Erba's little face again. I wished to be in my own garden. Again, I repeated it over and over until I felt it working. I felt Sammy squeeze my hand, and I knew we were home. I opened my eyes and with a whimper said to Sammy, "I'm never going to see you again, am I?" He knelt down in front of me and said, "I don't think I will ever be able to visit you again, Paul. I have done what I was supposed to do. I made you happy. You are happy, aren't you?" I nodded my head and said, "Yes, I am, but I still need you and Erba to play with me when I'm sad." Sammy slowly shook his head and said that wouldn't be possible. Right at that moment, I knew that Sammy had to go and I would never see him again. Before Sammy left, we sat on the snow and had a long chat about lots of different things, which was nice. Then he stood up and said, "Paul, it's time I went back to Snowtopia." I was happy he was going to be a part of another child's life, so I just put my arms around him and gave him the biggest hug I had ever given him and said my goodbye. I walked towards the back door, but just before I opened it, I looked back to see Sammy. He was gone. For a long time after that night, my life didn't feel quite the same. Then one cold windy afternoon, a family moved into a house a few doors away. I could see all the stuff being moved out of the van and into the house. Then I saw that they had a little boy about my age. At school, the next week, while sitting in the classroom, the teacher introduced him to us all. She said, "Please, class, welcome our newest pupil, Erba Samuel Snow." I was so shocked I nearly fell off my chair. I just couldn't believe my ears. A few weeks went by, and Erba and I became the best of friends. And I dare say we will be forever. The end. Or is it? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the description below, I have included links where you may find and purchase this book.